Hello, everybody, and welcome to Where Are They Now in Sports, live from the Shave in Beverly Hills. Today's guest is a former Major League Baseball player that played in the league for 8 years. And in those 8 years, he kept a secret. At the time, he was confused. He was hiding something. And most of all, he couldn't be himself. When he played sports back then, the only sexuality that was accepted was being straight. That led him to retire at the age of 31. And 3 years after his retirement, he shared his secret to the world. We at The Shave are so delighted to have Billy Beane.
The Yankees offered you $60,000.
Yeah.
What were you thinking, Billy? I mean, come on, you could have played for my home team, man.
Yeah,
What happened?
that's a
then?
tough
How come
time.
you declined?
I think the only reason I said no was, and I was so thrilled and honored to be drafted by the Yankees, but I had a great coach named Dave Snow who was amazing at Cal State Fullerton. He coached at Loyola, he coached at Long Beach State, coached probably 50 big leaguers in his career. He just was so persuasive and built a legacy. And we ended up going to the College World Series. We were ranked number 1 in Division I for, I think, 3 weeks that year.
And how much did you get when you got drafted?
How much did I get? I got drafted by the Detroit Tigers the next year in the 4th round, and I think I signed for $25,000. But I was a senior in college, but I graduated from Loyola, and one of the things that they did that extra year did help me, and they put me straight into Double-A as opposed to going to the lower minor league levels, which bought me time.
Right.
And that was the conversation. And the Tigers were the right team for me at that time.
When you got drafted, 2-3 picks later, who got drafted? Do you remember?
Yeah, I got drafted ahead of Bo Jackson.
Yeah,
I don't think any team wants to admit that they let him go be behind me. But what a thrill! My first big league game, he was playing with Kansas City, and the only reason for that was that nobody thought he would pick baseball over football.
When you got to Detroit, the security was like, "Who are you?" Right?
Yeah. Well, I didn't have any. You have to have like a pass that shows who you are, and I looked probably like I was 15 years old. And they don't make announcements for that. I was
Right.
and I had to walk around and find somebody because I didn't have a cell phone. Nobody had phone.
Right.
It wasn't like you could text somebody. And then finally somebody said, "Hey, he's the new kid on the team," and then the guy was really sorry about it. But it's just funny. A lot of players go through that thing. Your career is made on playing between the lines, but the logistics of life, it takes a village to kind of help a guy, make it.
And Sparky Anderson, legendary manager.
Yep.
What did he tell you when you got up there? What did he say to you?
Well, Sparky and I had got off to a really good start because I really turned heads when I first signed. I did really well in Double-A. They brought me in Instruction League. I ripped that up pretty good. Sparky was just, he's sitting there in his long john underwear, smoking a pipe, and his feet up in his office, and he just said, "Kid, you've been playing great. Kirk went down. I need you to play, and we'll just take it as it comes, and don't put pressure on yourself." And then I got off to a pretty good start there too.
You actually had a great game that day.
Yeah.
You went 4 for 6.
Yep.
I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's something a rookie, if you could just get that one hit.
Right. No, it was, that's when you feel like you're floating and you can't, I think it's interesting because I was so overwhelmed by the situation, never playing in a big league stadium before. It was a day game. The Tigers, it was a huge crowd, but I just told myself, I just want to try to make contact with the ball. For some reason, I just centered the ball.
How's the tension in the clubhouse when you go back to the farm? Because you've been having that experience.
Yeah, that's probably when pro sports stops being fun. When Sparky called me in, I probably had not played in about 7 or 8 days, not even once. And he said, "Kid, I got to send you out." And I didn't know if that meant I could never go back to the big leagues. And then he said, "Listen, kid, you just got to play. You're just getting started. I can't have you sitting on the bench," which was a smart decision. But when I went back to that clubhouse in Toledo, all the guys are like, "You messed up, dude. You blew it." It's like, if you would have played great, you'd still be there. And all of a sudden, the doubts start to come in.
Right.
And, for someone to come up, I was hitting, I think, like 270 or something. And that was because was making, I hadn't got a couple hits as a pinch hitter, but I only had about 70, 80 at bats. Then it didn't seem fun in Toledo anymore. It just seemed like I must be doing something wrong or I would be in Detroit. And that was a learning process that I had to go through. Every player has to go through. And a lot of times when you see a player do something in the big leagues who's gone through some real tough times, there's such a sense of relief and sort of a personal triumph. And when I watch players, and I get very connected to that process, because not everyone is a Derek Jeter or has a career like a Hall of Famer or Albert Pujols or something like that. Most guys, and the nature of baseball is that you do get punched in the nose a few times, and it's a tough thing to do.
Speaking of punch to the nose, here's a true story. You were at Detroit. He invited his mom to the game. And then what happened that day?
Well, my mom had never seen me play in Detroit, and I had been up for probably 2.5 months at the time. And I thought, well, why don't you come out and see a game? Because the stadium is so great, and you have to see it to really experience it. And the irony is that I flew my mom all the way out to Detroit by herself. She's in the stands, and that was the day that Sparky called me in and said, I got to send you out. And basically, I went from being on the field in my uniform, where he called me in during batting practice so it wasn't in front of all the other guys, because, again, it's like getting fired in your office. It's a tough situation to go through, especially when you're young and everyone's watching. And then I ended up walking around underneath the stadium out where my mom was sitting, and I tapped her on the shoulder and I said, Mom, we have to go. I got sent to Toledo. And
that hurts.
It was awful. She started crying, thinking, again, nobody sits you down and explains the process. Instead of my mom watching me play in the big leagues, she helped me pack up and move to Toledo. And it was humiliating. I didn't want to play for the first time in my life, even though by the time I got myself ready, I went back and was good enough to get called back up.
Now, Dennis Gilbert, your sports agent at the time, he got you a deal, and you went to the Los Angeles Dodgers. Tell me your experience about Tommy Lasorda, especially the one when he's in the bathroom, in the stall. Hey, wow. Give me Billy Bean here. Tell me that experience.
You read my book. That's funny.
Well, that's how I get my research.
First week I was there, the Dodgers clubhouse is spread out. The bathrooms are all the way into the back. And I remember I was sitting in my locker, and Billy Russell, who was the bench coach at the time, said, hey, the skipper's looking for you. And for someone like me, that meant you're going down to the minor leagues. And I'm like, Skip, I said, it's Beaner. And he says, come here, and I'm like, where are you? And he goes, I'm sitting down over here. So I walk over. He's sitting down on the toilet, and he's literally talking to me as his stuff is happening, and he's just talking away and making conversation about nothing. And then I turn, look over this side, and there's like 6 or 7 guys just cracking up. Like it's one of the things he did to try to, get me to loosen up. And I was mortified. I had no idea what was going on, but it was just, it was Tommy's world there for sure,
And also, at the time, you had a girlfriend named Anna, and you told her, hey, I can't drive a Honda. Give me your Porsche, because I'm not going to Dodger Stadium with a Honda.
Yeah.
What made you do that?
Yeah. I ended up getting married to her, and we were together for almost 8.5 years. So, yeah, it was funny, because I just had, your basic little Honda Accord and this, embarrassing kind of simple car. And my ex-wife, her family was successful, and they bought her a car. And I thought I should drive a Porsche if I'm going to be in Dodger City, because all the players there, that was, always one of the highest, salaried player teams.
About your personal life at the time, nobody knew what you were going through.
Right.
When did you find men attractive? When did you really have that thought about, hey, you know what? Something is stimulating about this person. Talk to me about those days.
Well, I grew up in a really structured environment. My mom was a single mom until about 9 years old. She married my stepfather, who they're still married now.
He's got my name, right?
Yep. So, and then the great irony of my life, I think, is that when I went from the Detroit Tigers, and as you said, Dennis Gilbert got me traded to the LA Dodgers, I had bought into an apartment building with 9 of our players in the which is very common, an investment group within an agency, and that building was in West Hollywood, and I had never even seen it. I just bought with the money I was making in baseball. And Dennis was like, move into the building. We've got 1 unit open. It's perfect. You don't need to live in a hotel for the rest of the year. And again, I was living in Detroit, got traded to Los Angeles. I had to move to LA and be ready to play baseball within 3 days. So, there was no prepared decision. And I moved into that building. And then all of a sudden, I'm running around West Hollywood with my wife. And you start to see images and guys that were comfortable with themselves. This was a very progressive part. It was still in the 80s, so it wasn't easy. It took me about probably 4 or 5 years after I got married to start to get curious and really worry that something was off with me. And so, it wasn't like one day or one person. It was a little bit over time, and that's where that division where I really started struggling with the desire to find out about that, the fact that I was married, the fact that I was in the big leagues, and people were dying of HIV at that time. It's one of the things that I've tried to find the most compassion when I'm talking to groups where people are trying to explore or identify with somebody that that they can look up to, is understanding that everybody goes through that process in a different way. It's a totally different world from, you and I grew up at times without a computer. I mean, it wasn't like, and these kids are 10 and 11 years old, can find out anything they want these days. And for me, it took a long, long time. And unfortunately, I hurt a lot of people by being in the closet as well as myself.
But now, you being in the closet, I know you and Brad Osmus, who right now is coaching the Detroit Tigers. Hopefully they'll make the playoffs. Did you ever have that thought, this guy's one of my best friends. I want to tell him, but I don't want to tell him. I want to tell him, but I don't want to tell him.
Yeah, no, I thought about that a lot. And if there was ever a guy that I could have told, and it would have been him. And that's an interesting conversation that him and his wife, who I'm very close with, Liz, we've talked about in a way that from their perspective, because they have such an open mind and heart that they can't understand why we didn't talk about it. But for me, I was afraid of how it would change my friendship with Brad. And I didn't want him to see me any other way except as his baseball friend and his roommate. And mostly I was projecting my baggage with being gay onto other people. The way I was raised, what I thought my stepfather, his belief system, the thought of telling him, I'd rather have run away than do that. You know what I mean? It was just something where I didn't want to let down. When any player that's in the big leagues, their whole family is in the big leagues. And so there's a huge responsibility that goes with that. And it really was the beginning of the end of my playing, because I couldn't reconcile the two things together.
But now, when you were hiding, okay, let's say when you were going out to the gay bars.
I wasn't.
You weren't?
No, there was no. That's why it took so long. I wasn't trying to go. I mean, the first time I ever had an experience, I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We were far away from LA, so I did go one time. But I wasn't a guy that went out. I was not active. I was hiding. What I needed was to talk to somebody like a therapist or a mentor or somebody that would help me understand that A, that it's okay, B, it doesn't have to interfere with your career. But I think where the most of my drama was I realized that I was married to someone who I loved dearly, but I was going to crush our future.
Okay, but let's say the guy from Albuquerque, right? Mm-hmm. You got to hide it because you don't want the sports world to know that you're gay. So if he asked you, Billy, what do you do for a living? What do you tell him?
I lied to him. So I just told him I was traveling through town. And in those days, Eddie, guys knew. You know when someone's in the closet and when they're not. And most guys that are what you would call a nice guy, they don't ask questions. You know what I mean? The different dynamic of that time was that most people were not looking for someone to marry or something. It was an exploration, and once you're clear up front with that, you can tell. Because if someone starts asking too many questions, I just would have left. Right. You know what I mean? So that wasn't it wasn't a requirement. That guy, I don't remember his name. He would have loved to become better friends or something. But for me, that moment was not about a long-term situation. It was about, is this real or is this not real?
But after your first experience, you hear guys in the clubhouse, us men, we all say gay jokes.
Sure.
It's just normal being in the sports world. Did that offend
you? It was
you?
Normal.
It was. Yeah. Did that offend you? Like when you were like, why would they?
Well, you know what it did? I really was a different person in the clubhouse. I was cognizant of it, and that hearing that reminded me that I needed to stay in the closet. You know what I mean? It wasn't like I need to go over and talk to you and say, look, you need to chill out with that conversation, because then people would be like, what, are you soft, or what's that all about? And you know that as a straight guy, that if you are too concerned about somebody's, sexuality. I mean, you live in LA, you're in a very integrated world now. If you're in an entertainment business or, this type of business, you're going to interact with all kinds of people. But if you have a problem with something, it draws attention to it. And I think that's what I think most people, at least from my community, they don't mind who or what you are. If when it comes to friendship, it's just the hypocrisy of a double standard that is the parts that hurts the most.
Now, you actually had a partner that you were deeply in love with.
Yeah.
Everything was going your way. You felt so good about him and yourself. But there was one time you hit your first major league home run, and you have one of your great friends, Brad Osmus and Trevor Hoffman. They knock on the door.
Yeah.
You look through the peek hole. What do you do in that situation? Because you were still hiding at the time.
Yeah, I was totally hiding. I hid till the day I quit. That was something, again, that experience was great bonding time for, those guys knew how hard I'd worked to get back to the big leagues, and I was really starting to play really well. And I think one of the saddest days of my life happened on one of the greatest moments of my life. And the only thing I did was I protected baseball first, and I did not protect my relationship. And I told my partner at the time and this is the guy I left my marriage for, to go down out the back. And I lived in a multi-level place in Del Mar, and the garage was on the bottom floor. And I made him go downstairs, and he sat in the car. And those guys, we ended up hanging out for a while, like a long time. And every single minute, I didn't know if he was going to come back up and my whole world was going to blow up, but he was such a wonderful person. He knew how much I was struggling with the balance of the two, and he stayed down there, and that ended up kind of hurting me more, because I realized he was the only person that knew the truth, really knew me in the whole world. And even though Brad and Trevor and Archie and those kind of guys, I mean, they've stayed great friends, great people that I'd want in my life as friends. But at the time, I just thought no one would ever love me unless I'm straight. And so that day was tough. And he sat down there for a long time, and then he waited, and he couldn't even really look at me after, when those guys left.
Now, while you were in a relationship with him, have your teammates be like, hey, come on, go out with us. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Or like when you're at a bar or wherever, a lounge, and there's girls, and I know, Billy, girls were hitting on you. I know that for a fact.
Yeah.
Where you're like, your team was like, Billy, what are you doing? Look at that girl.
You have to play the game. And that was when I talk about being a hypocrite, that's when I was being a hypocrite. And but I was perpetuating a lie. I had to, and you're right, when you're single and you are young and you're whatever, and girls are paying attention to you, the guys are watching, and if you don't reciprocate in that situation, then you're going to be, and that's what I think is the greatest tragedy about athletes today that are in the closet, is that you are pulling in innocent people into that lie. Now, I didn't get married under that pretense, because I like I said, it was 5 years after I got married, almost 5 years, that I was the first time I explored that. And I was always faithful to my wife. But the need to cover and protect your bases is a very strong impulse for any athlete. And it may not be a lot of players who are doing it, but we certainly know that there's more than just me that have played in the major leagues that happen to be gay.
Bill, you lost your partner. That day was the worst day of your life. I mean, there was so much going on that day, but it was early on a Sunday morning. 3 in the morning. You saw him around midnight or something like that. You took him to the hospital, and then what happened?
Well, I had found out that just about 2 months before that he was HIV positive. And again, that's another, damaging fact of the closet, that he had not taken care of himself to test himself, put me at risk without knowing it. And I came home from a game, and I had a great game, and it was just, I all of a sudden I felt like my life was really going in a direction where I was a big leaguer, not a guy who's trying to stay in the big leagues. And I saw him passed out basically on the bed, and he was not responsive. And I rushed him down to the emergency room, and there was a whole drama about getting, brought into the hospital because we weren't family. I didn't bring his wallet. I didn't think. I had to pay with a credit card to get him admitted, like just crazy stuff about when they don't know why two guys are together. It was a very interesting lesson right in my face. And then he just never came out of it. He was laboring with his breathing. They gave him something to try to calm him down. And over like a 5-hour period, it just seemed like he was getting worse and worse, and his skin was changing color. And what ended up happening is his pancreas ruptured, and he basically was poisoned, by his own body fluids. And he went into cardiac arrest, holding my hand, and they pushed me away. And he was only like 37 years old, and just it was.
But after that, when he died,
yeah.
You also had to go.
Yeah, I had a 1:00 game that day at Angel Stadium. It was the last day before spring training ended, and it was about 7:30 when I pulled out of the hospital parking lot with a bag of his clothes in my hand, and I literally did not know. I didn't call anybody. I didn't know who to, because nobody knew that we were in a relationship. Nobody. And his sister did. That was the only person, and she lived in Maryland. So I called her, but then I just got in the car and drove to the game. And
when you got to the stadium, did anybody sense, Billy, you okay?
No.
What's going on?
No.
I mean, that's great acting then, right there.
Yeah. No, it was. I was really on a different whole shockwave. I don't know. I was hurting, but I didn't allow myself to let the emotions take over yet, because I was always the soldier kind of guy that was. I had a game, this is what the hardest part to explain to why I ended up quitting after that year was that the toll of bearing that and hiding who and what I really was, it was literally eating me up, and I was losing weight, and the grief, became very emotional where I had not really been before in my life over small things. And I think I was trying to reach out to someone, but I was afraid to. And instead of doing that, my parents didn't find out that I was gay until over a year after I quit playing. And that process has taken years to heal, because my family was so in love with being part of baseball. And so I look back and I think, how could I have been so afraid to just talk to somebody? But I just thought, I'm going to become something that I don't want to be. And then I was also dealing with the fear that I might be sick, or contracted HIV from Sam, which I never did. But for that time, for like that year, the way the doctors educated people was that if you were exposed, it might happen down the road. So not only was I going to the park as a closeted person, I thought I might be sick or ill with the virus. And the trainers and, sliding in the dirt and, all kinds of stuff. I mean, my mind was a mess. And it was like going to, when you see somebody go to the doctor and they have a lump in their breast, or a woman or something, the fear that it might be breast cancer. It's the uncertainty that eats you up more than the facts. And so I didn't put myself in a position to get the real facts. I just kept going back to that same doctor and getting tested, and I kept testing negative. And I've been very, very fortunate to stay healthy and remain negative to this day. But I could have easily not been.
Right.
And I could have easily died too.
Oh, thank God you didn't. In 1999, you had a reporter from Miami. You and your new partner at the time, you guys opened up a restaurant. What did she do with that story? Were you mad at her for writing this article?
Well, it's funny because I think there's a part of every person that's in the closet that wants to come out, but I had never put enough thought into it. And we were doing a little story about a restaurant. My new partner that I had met in Miami after I stopped playing had been a successful restaurant tour, and she was doing just a piece about a restaurant opening in a hotshot spot in Miami Beach. And when I said yes, she said, "Billy, this is such great news." And then it literally turned, the world upside down. They ran it, as opposed to writing about the restaurant, they put pictures of me in my uniform from this, when I was a player, saying, after years of hiding, a player comes out and blah, blah, blah.
Were you upset about that?
The night before, I did call her and say, I don't want to do the story. And she says, it's too late. It's my story now. And her name is Lydia Martin, and she's a very, very good writer in Miami, for the Miami Herald. And she did me a great favor. And that's the way I always looked at it, because it really turned the light on in my life. I was living a very dark, secretive life for no reason at all. And it was really that I refused to put myself in a position to learn about all the wonderful people in the LGBT community and look for help to understand what I was going through. And I learned a lot. So I'm grateful that it was random. It was an accident. I didn't have a book. I didn't have an agent. I didn't have any plan to be a celebrity. It was very organic in a way that I never planned on being a public speaker of any kind either. But I realize now, as you go through my life story and the things that I went through, it really has helped a lot of people get through their own story, because every story is equally difficult and wonderful in its own.
So a Bud Selig announcer, talk to me about that.
Yeah, no, it's been great. I was out of baseball for a very long time, and I worked very hard to build a real estate career in Miami and in LA, and I've had a wonderful life off the field. But I miss being a part of baseball forever. And about 3 or 4 months ago, I got a call from Major League Baseball, and they asked if they could talk to me. And I've been pretty visible in the philanthropic world and the LGBT community. But baseball had not reached out to talk to me in a long time. And so I went to New York. I was very interested. They didn't tell me what it was about. I sat down, and they talked to me about their desire to create a position that would help put a bridge between the two worlds. And as all your viewers have seen, the message of this day is different than 20 years ago. And the players need to understand the type of world they live in, the opportunity that that they have as role models with Twitter and Facebook, and 1 minute anything they say can be global news. And it's just been a tremendous honor, to go and meet with Commissioner Selig and Joe Torre and just some of these legends in the game, and for them to get to know me enough to feel confident that I could represent the league. It's a tremendous honor, and I love baseball. I love being a player, and I'm really, really looking forward to the opportunity to help grow the sport in a way that doesn't take away anything between the lines. It's just helping the players understand, and maybe if there are some players that are struggling with the same topic that that I did, they'll know that baseball won't reject them.
So do you think there's some Major League Baseball players right now, or college
Well, I've met 4 or 5 college players in the last year who are out and playing and healthy, coming out stories, and their teams embraced them. I mean, one of the great stories about Michael Sam was that he told his Missouri team before the season started last year, and nobody talked about it because
kept it quiet. Yeah.
he was one of them. He was one of their brothers, and that's the beauty of sport, and that's what I believe will happen for any player that might be in the closet now. We're not looking for anyone to have to step forward. What I want to do is make players know that if that is a part of their life, that we will be there for them, and that the league is going to be inclusive long before that moment happens.